Hello, everybody. Just wanted to give a little history lesson as I was supposed to be a coach and a history teacher before getting into the mortgage industry. So you'll have to bear with me as we get into a little bit of a history lesson here. But the big talk right now is on the tariffs and the effects it's going to have on the economy. And I think a little bit of context here will definitely help. So let's start with some of the misconceptions about the tariffs themselves. I'm sure if you watch too much CNN, you're probably going to think that tariffs are the end of the world, that they were the main cause of the Great Depression, all that kind of good stuff. When in reality, tariffs are the tariffs right now are more of just a means to an end. So we'll talk about that here in a minute. But you've probably heard of the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act. What was it put in like the 1930, 31? So it kind of was on the beginning part of the Great Depression. But I'd argue that no one that we're talking to right now or that we're listening has ever heard of the Fordney-McCumber tariff. It's funny because we have so much data on how things actually work, but so many of the talking heads choose to ignore that data. So I'll start with this. When we're talking about a recession, and everyone, of course, is worried about a recession because of tariffs, right? When we talk about recessions, it's not if we're going to have a recession. Well, I don't know. I don't know if we're going to have one right now, but it's not if another one happens. It's going to happen. It's inevitable. Recessions always happen. There's always economic growth and contraction. The key is it's not about how you go into the recession. It's how you come out of the recession. It's all about how you react to that economic contraction. That makes all the difference. So did you know, or do you know what the biggest stock market crash of all time was? If you're going to say in 1929 to start the Great Depression, you would be I'll say you're partially right. I was going to say you're partially wrong, but you're partially right. The biggest ever stock market crash on a single day was in 1987. The stock market crashed, fell about 22% on October 19th of 87. The crash of 1929 over 2 days, a total of about 25% of the stock market lost its value. So technically the 29 stock market crash was a tiny bit larger, but for a single day, it was 1987. It's interesting though, because we don't really hear about a Great Depression around that time either. Maybe it was a recession, but that was about it, right? So, but I also want to bring up what is basically a footnote in history, but should be talked about way, way more. And it revolves around probably my favorite presidents of all time. There was a recession in 1920, 1921. There was a pretty humongous stock market crash in 1919 as well. And of course, we're going to talk about that and how it contrasts with the Great Depression of the 30s. But both had very, very similar triggers, but there were polar opposite responses. From 1919 to 1921, GDP dropped by an estimated 22%. And the stock market lost almost 50% of its value. So that's a humongous economic contraction in that time period, in those 2 years. So it was like I said, stock market crash in 1919 and then preceding recession after that. The Fordney-McCumber tariff was signed into law in 1922, and it nearly doubled the current tariffs of its time. So why the heck do we always hear about the roaring 20s? If there was a stock market crash at the beginning of the 20s and then a massive tariff being instituted right after that, why did we have the roaring 20s? The reason being is that because of President Warren G. Harding, and then he passed away and his successor, Calvin Coolidge, cut taxes, slashed regulations, and drastically reduced the size of government, giving us 7 years of economic prosperity. Now, let's contrast that with the Great Depression. The Great Depression, triggered by the stock market crash in 1929. But it was called a depression because of the response. It wasn't a recession, it was a depression, right? The Smoot-Hawley tariffs did not help, and those were instituted again a couple years after the actual crash. The Smoot-Hawley tariffs did not help, but massive overregulation, increased taxes, wage and price controls all contributed to an economy that took over a decade to recover to previous levels. So on the one hand, we had an economic crash with a tariff increase, and on the other hand, we had an economic crash with a tariff increase. But the responses were drastically different, and so were the results. So that is kind of what we need to be focused on. It's not the tariffs themselves. The tariffs are not going to destroy the economy. They never have. And they never have single-handedly done that. What we need to do is look at the response and or the plan of action. I think the main thing is we want to look at times of economic boom and times of economic bust and what those reactions were. This is one of my favorite speeches, if you will. If you have half an hour to listen to it, it is fantastic. This is John F. Kennedy at the Economic Club of New York in 1962. And this is just one snip of one of my favorite parts of the speech.
It is a paradoxical truth that tax rates are too high today and tax revenues are too low. And the soundest way to raise the revenues in the long run is to cut the rates now. The experience of a number of European countries and Japan have borne this out. This country's own experience with tax reduction in 1954 has borne this out. And the reason is that only full employment can balance the budget, and tax reduction can pave the way to that employment. Mm-hmm. The purpose of cutting taxes now is not to incur a budget deficit, but to achieve the more prosperous, expanding economy, which can bring a budget surplus. I repeat, our practical choice is not between a tax cut deficit and a budgetary surplus. It is between two kinds of deficits: a chronic deficit of inertia as the unwanted result of inadequate revenues and a restricted economy, or a temporary deficit of transition resulting from a tax cut designed to boost the economy, increase tax revenues, and achieve, I believe this can be done, a budget surplus. The first type of deficit is a sign of waste and weakness. The second reflects an investment in the future.
Really good. Really, really good. And all of those economic truths hold today. So next, it's funny, is that Kennedy is extremely similar in his economic philosophy to on another one of my favorite presidents, obviously, Mr. Ronald Reagan.
Back then, government's view of the economy could be summed up in a few short phrases. If it moves, tax it. If it keeps moving, regulate it. And if it stops moving, subsidize it. Well, with your help, I think we've turned all that around. We cut taxes, we squashed inflation, brought interest rates down, threw out needless regulations, setting the economy on a growth path that has created somewhere in the neighborhood of 11 million new jobs in under 4 years.
Sounds very, very similar to some rhetoric that's happening today, actually, right? So cut taxes, low regulation, lower inflation, things are going to work out, right? Very funny because it also sounds pretty similar to this guy.
The era of big government is over.
Huh. What? Y'all remember that one? Yeah, the era of big government is over. Very, very interesting. Yeah, so we had Reagan and Kennedy with their, trickle down economics. And then, obviously Bill Clinton, he reduced government spending with Newt Gingrich. He read the tea leaves, very pragmatic, and just come as close to a balanced budget as we had in a long, long time. And which sounds a lot like what Trump is wanting to do right now. And we had a great economy in the 90s, And of course, the other end of the spectrum is the reaction taken during the Great Depression, right? FDR came in, instituted a ton of new government policies, like, again, increased taxes, over-regulation, really just stymied the desire for businesses to want to risk it all to create and build wealth. That's what's happening. That's what happened then. And we had a 10-year long Great Depression. The 2008 great financial crisis. Again, it's not how we went into the recession, it's how we come out. And this is the one quote that always hits home for me during that time.
I want to be clear. We're not trying to push financial reform because we begrudge success that's fairly earned. I mean, I do think at a certain point you've made enough money.
There you go. At some point, I do think you've made enough money. That slip of the tongue, I guarantee you, business owners, business leaders heard that more than anything else. What that says is that even though you are going to risk everything, your entire livelihood, in order to start a business, expand a business, hire people, try to grow that business and create jobs and wealth for other people as well, at some point you've done too well. That slip of the tongue is the whole mindset behind the great financial crisis, the recession that happened after that, the 6-7 years of malaise that we had. So I say all of that to circle back around to the tariff issue right now. Again, it's not how you go into the recession, it's how you come out of the recession, right? Pro growth, low tax agendas work. If you think that we're any different than our kids that we give rewards to, you're either don't understand economic principles or you're lying to yourself. We give our kids rewards for doing a good job, right? For making straight A's, for doing well in their baseball games, or for shooting a low round of golf, right? We give them rewards in order to motivate them to do better at certain things. Why do you think that grown-ups are any different? They're not. We all want a reward, right? We all want to keep the fruits of our labor, right? And it's pretty simple. So the whole idea behind the tariffs right now is to bring other countries to the table to work out fair deals, because up until now, most other countries, especially other big economies around the world, have been tariffing our products, and so we don't even have a marketplace in those areas. You're not going to see a Corvette or a Mustang on the Autobahn, right? I bet you probably don't see too many California wines in France, right? But there's plenty of BMWs and Mercedes here. There's plenty of French wines and Argentinian wines, Spanish and Italian wines that you can get here. So our markets have been open and have always been open. The problem is that we have such high corporate taxes, high regulations, high costs of doing business in this country that it's cheaper to manufacture or make things in other countries and then ship them into the United States because we don't have any tariffs. So the whole idea behind the tariffs is, number one, to create a level playing field with which we can freely trade back and forth with other countries. And if somebody makes a better product, then that product is going to win out, whether it's a company based in Europe or America or in Mexico or in Thailand or wherever. It does not matter. If the product is better, if the product is truly better, then it will win out. That's what we're looking to do. And if we can get to the point where products can be made in America again, not everything, but at least something, right? Then that is good for all. Now, everyone is all worried about if tariffs do go into effect, which we've already seen. So many countries have already come to the table. They're already wanting to make a deal because they know that they need to have access to the American markets, not the politicians in these countries, the business leaders in these countries. So I guarantee you, the business leaders in all these countries were calling the politicians like crazy for that first 2 days, saying, reduce your tariffs so we can have access to the American markets again. That's what they're concerned with. So there shouldn't really be a concern. I don't think at this point. There's a lot of negotiations that are happening. I think it's all going to get worked out. One thing that we need to understand is This is where we are in uncharted territory because it's the first time we've ever had an actual businessman running the damn country. It's always been lawyers, politicians, you know, military leaders, which were great, obviously, but we've never had an actual businessman doing what is supposed to be done. So when you're looking at it from a business perspective, you're going to negotiate and do everything for your own business. And right now, the United States of America is Trump's business. In terms of inflation, inflation is what drives interest rates higher. We are already seeing inflation come down, and there is no evidence in the history of all the tariffs that tariffs cause inflation. That's false. It's never happened before. Tariffs did not cause inflation. When it comes to the real estate industry itself, I think that overall it's going to be a winner. I don't think that an aggressive governing philosophy initially, if it does hurt a little bit, it's kind of like taking your medicine. You got to take your medicine in order to get better, right? If you're sick. So I don't think that if there is a little bit of pain with this very pro American stance that we have right now, it'll be very short lived. I think that what we can anticipate is a more robust economy with hopefully more people able to qualify for homes. So we may see quite a bit more first time buyers who are in better financial positions that we've seen in the last 4 or 5 years. So look for that. Rates will keep coming down because inflation is going to keep coming down. So which will obviously open up more buyers or open up the purchasing power for more buyers. So let's look for that as well. And if rates do come down enough, it might convince enough current homeowners who are sitting on a 3 or 4% rate to go ahead and make that move, because maybe a jump from 3.5 to 4% up to a 5 or 5.5 is not as big of a deal. But literally doubling the rate like we had a couple years ago, that was very much a daunting task. So I hope this helped. I hope the little bit of perspective helps a little bit. If you really do look at the data, if you look at history, there none of this is none of these concepts are new. Human nature is not new. But hope you enjoyed this little history lesson. It's good to put things in perspective because people are still the same as they were 100 years ago. People are not any different. They still have the same motivations to take care of themselves and take care of their family. You know, the laws of economics still work, even though things move much more quickly these days. They still work. None of these All of these policies are just new to us because they haven't been utilized in so long. And I think that we're in uncharted territory because we've been going down this path for so long that we're trying to revert back away from basically a century of poor political decisions. That's basically what we're trying to backtrack from. And it's going to take some time, but it has to be done. But I think that for our industry, for real estate, for mortgage, it will get better because the overall health of the economy is going to get better. And that's what we really need. We need people to be confident in the markets, confident in their livelihood, in their jobs, so that they do feel that they can, purchase a home and be a homeowner and not be worried about what's going to happen next month.